Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I am happy to bring another episode to you today. I hope you're enjoying these conversations I'm having. If you are enjoying them, you can like the show on Facebook, share it on social media, Twitter, whatever you do. That's really the only way I'm promoting the show at this point is just kind of watching people share it. So that's great to see. I hope you like and enjoy and think about the episode and conversation I'm presenting today. This is a talk I had with Doug Henwood. Doug Henwood is, I think, a rather popular figure on my Facebook timeline, but he's a journalist whose work in Harper's, in The Nation, and in Left Business Observer is pretty well known. And he recently appeared and was interviewed on CNN by Andrew Cuomo's brother, and we all had a laugh about that wonderful exchange about Hillary Clinton. Doug Henwood's recent cover story, Harper's cover story about Hillary Clinton, is making waves. Still, right now, there are angry letters appearing in Harper's from people that are absolutely outraged that Doug Henwood would dare attack the idea of Hillary Clinton's inevitable presidential run in 2016. We talk about that article. We talk about how it came together and the possible fallout from that article, but also just about the wider politics of what's going on in the United States today and for the last I guess 50 years. Doug told me about his time in the late 1960s in New Jersey, kind of figuring out where he would fit into the political and cultural milieu. It's fascinating stuff. It's so great to hear from Doug and hear a little bit about his story. And we talked about everything you can imagine around politics, mostly about the left and where the left goes, but also about kind of, it surprised me to hear his take on Milton Friedman, and how powerful Milton Friedman's kind of polemical, rhetorical gauntlet about capitalism, how powerful that was in Doug's life and his thinking about not only economics, but about kind of how we make political change. So this was a great conversation. I know a lot of people who listen to this show are fans of Doug Henwood. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I want to let you know that I have more episodes on the way in the new year, but I'm going to take a short break for the holidays, so I'll have new episodes back on January 5th, and I've got a round of really great guests to start the new year off, so I'm looking forward to sharing those with you. I hope you enjoy this conversation. You can find more episodes of the Nostalgia Trap on iTunes. You can go to nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com to find all of the episodes. You can go to stitcher.com, and of course, if you like the page on Facebook, you'll get updates on new episodes and other stuff like that. Thanks so much for listening to the show. I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is me talking to Doug Henwood. You were talking about the Clinton years as now, as in retrospect, the good old days. Why do you say that, and did that have anything to do with the Clintons?
Not really in particular. I think, you could argue that the first tax increase, the increased taxes on the rich, brought down the budget deficit. That led the Federal Reserve to stop worrying so much about deficits and inflation and all that business. Interest rates came down. And there was a great bubble in the financial markets, but that also spilled over to the general population. I don't think really Clinton policy had much to do with it. He talked a lot about investing in infrastructure and people. Every year the budget documents would come out, and I'd look at them, and the budget documents, U.S. budget documents, are thick. There's usually like a sort of slick prose introduction, and then all the numbers in separate volumes, and the prose introduction is always full of this high-flown rhetoric about investing in people and things. And then you look at the actual budget numbers, and sometimes, I'm not kidding, you had to take it out to 2 decimal places to see any effect as a percentage of GDP.
Wow.
So it was, the rhetoric was so far in advance of the actual investment. Actually, public investment was pretty weak under Clinton. He cut back. And there's all this deficit mania that took over as a decade wore on. But there was that period for the last few years of the 90s when every decile of the income distribution, every demographic by race or gender, saw strong real wage gains for 3, 4, 5 years. And we haven't seen anything like that since the real wage peaked out in 1973. So
Wow.
we've done more than 40 years. That was the only exception to that, more than 40 years of average wage stagnation or decline.
Yeah, decades of losing for labor.
Yeah, and then, there was enough of a payoff for the broad population that sometimes the bubble felt like fun. There was such crazy stuff going on during the dot-com era.
Yeah.
And just lunatic stuff got funded. But on the other hand, it's not hard to get a job, and wages are rising.
Yeah.
And so it felt good. And I think that's what made Seattle possible.
The WTO thing?
The WTO week in Seattle is that, people think that hard times inspire political rebellion, but in fact, they rarely do, unless it's extremely bad, like the 1930s. But, if you look at the 70s, there was a rightward move when the economy went sour. There's certainly, aside from Occupy, this has not been the recent post-financial crisis era.
Yeah.
Has not been broadly favorable to the left. We've seen a lot of right-wing governments take power all across the world.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think when we have moderately bad times, people get scared, hunker down, and just hope for a return to the good old days.
Yes.
And they don't want to make any rock the boat. But when you get a strong economy like we had in the late 90s, people may start. There's something dangerous to the established order about rising expectations.
Is this as good as it gets?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is good, better than nothing. But
Right.
really, is this it?
Yeah.
And that's what I think that can really inspire troublemaking. And I think the ruling class understands this. They don't like excessively high employment rates. They don't like to see expanding real incomes beyond a certain amount. They want to see people a little bit on the defensive, a little scared. And Alan Greenspan would testify publicly before Congress in pretty much those words. He would say that it's good. The working class is acting as if the unemployment rate is higher than it is.
Yeah.
The unemployment rate may be 5%, but they're acting like it's 7%. So that's good. They're scared, and they're not going to demand real wage increases or anything.
Yeah. And speaking of wage increases, I just showed this in a different class. I'm teaching a class on the Great Depression right now, but we're talking about unions, and so I showed this movie American Dream. It's a Barbara Koppel documentary about Hormel meatpacking, a strike that occurred in the late 80s, and there's a lot to talk about with that movie, but what I wanted to ask you about it was there when you hear from Hormel executives, they're talking about dropping the wages from $10.69 to $8.25 an hour for their meat packers. And the reason they're doing this, according to the executives, is that we have to stay competitive. We have to stay competitive. And it seemed like a meme in the 1980s and maybe into the 90s of corporations that were making huge profits, saying we have to stay competitive. What do they mean when they say that? Is that just a complete lie, or are they really concerned about the ability of their corporation to keep moving forward?
Marx has a passage about competition saying, "March, march to the capitalist."
Yeah.
So the competition is a real thing, but a lot of that drive to cut costs that took off in the 80s and extended into the 90s and on to today was driven by what was called the shareholder revolution. From the 1930s into the 1970s, stockholders really didn't have much influence on how corporations were run. They were very passive. All they said, just send us a dividend check and you run the corporation the way you want.
Right.
As the economy soured in the 70s and profits weakened and inflation rose, and there's a saying that for the working class, the 60s happened in the 70s. So you saw this spread of a bad attitude among the working class, rebelliousness, the blue-collar blues, all that. So you put all that stuff together. The owning class was very discontented in the 1970s. And so you saw in the financial sector, shareholders beginning to demand higher profits and higher stock prices. So going from having done nothing for decades and just being passive shareholders, they got much more active starting in the early 80s. So you saw the waves of leveraged buyouts that characterized the 1980s. And then as you went into the 90s, pension funds got more active in saying how corporations should be run. So what they wanted was more money now, basically.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that really drove that rage to increase profits was the demand coming from the Wall Street side. If you look at certain industries like automobiles,
right.
Automobiles went from being this protected oligopoly of the big three to being a globally competitive industry. So there were real competitive forces there. But in something like meatpacking, they just wanted higher profits. It's not like, the Japanese threat for producing sides of beef.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of amazing to watch the union lose through this movie. And
the international union was really the culprit in that, right?
Right. The international, they were pushing for concessions, and the smaller like local union wanted to fight. Yeah. And ultimately they lose everything. I think that I don't know, when you talk about like hard times don't necessarily create a left reaction, I feel like there's this story that we tell about the Great Depression, that we almost came to the brink of revolution, and the ruling class did the New Deal to kind of like save the country from the hordes coming with their pitchforks. I don't know if is that a view of the Depression that you share?
Well, there's a little something there. I mean, they were afraid of the Soviet Union,
right,
as an alternative model for how to do an economy. And those were the days when people thought the Soviet Union was really doing quite well, so they were scared. And domestically, we had communists organizing all over the place in the labor movement. In New York City, we had tenant groups that were organized by communists. In the South, we had black movement organized by communists. So there was this real... it was not the brink of revolution, but I think there was real fear among the elites that their days were numbered. And so they had to make concessions. And obviously, it were very limited concessions in a lot of cases. But you can't get the capitalist class to concede anything unless they're totally afraid of either losing it all or having their throats slit in their sleep.
Right. And I just wonder if that's a fear that they actually have now.
Well, it's really weird to see their reaction.
Doesn't seem like Occupy put that fear into the ruling class.
Yeah, it's weird to see their reaction now. You see these bigwigs making the most incredible comments. Like one of my favorites is Steve Schwartzman, a private equity guy who runs Blackstone. A few years ago, when Obama hinted that he was interested in removing a tax break that private equity and hedge fund people have, they get taxed at 15%. So they get taxed lower than most average folks do.
Right.
And Obama floated briefly, tentatively, in his inimitable way, the idea of perhaps thinking about lifting that. And Steve Schwartzman compared the Nazi invasion of Poland. And then more recently had Ken Langone, who founded Home Depot, whose name is all over NYU now, who said that complaints about CEO pay are like lynching.
Wow. The language
is so extreme.
Yeah.
Lynching Nazis.
Yeah.
What is motivating these guys, given that the threats to their rule are somewhere between slim and none?
Right.
And I think they must, in the back of their minds, have a bad conscience and fear that they do deserve to be strung up.
Yeah.
And that at some point their luck is going to run out and people will come after them with the pitchforks. So even though it doesn't look that way right now, I think there's always that fear that their luck is going to run out. And boy, their luck has been really spectacular for the last few decades. We've gone back, as everyone knows now, because Piketty has become a household name.
Right.
But we've gone back to Gilded Age levels of inequality. The thing about the Gilded Age, what people forget sometimes, is there's also a lot of there are populists, labor radicals, socialists all over the place. There was a famous costume party in the 1890s that was held at the Waldorf Astoria. I think 14 women came dressed as Marie Antoinette to this thing. But the organizers nailed the windows of the hotel shut because they were afraid of marauding socialists who break in and disrupt the proceedings. It's just that the second Gilded Age didn't feature anything like that.
Yeah.
So we have the inequality without the rebellion.
Yeah. I mean, it's when you put it that way, I think of the Gilded Age as like another neoliberal time in a sense, right? Like it's like neoliberalism without the neoliberalism, and it's like the Gilded Age is a total faith in the market and a total faith in the power of private industry to do things over the government at all. It seems like we're rolling that back. We're going back to that place. I mean, even
that was the liberal before the neo part,
right? And like I think of it, I don't know if it. I don't know if it was Wisconsin, a state yesterday that ruled that they had like a state ruling that said that the state has no interest in educating people.
Oh yeah, Michigan. Court in Michigan ruled.
I think it was in the Midwest.
The government, the Constitution does require. I guess the state Constitution does require that provide schooling.
Yeah,
but doesn't require it to be good schooling. So they really just want to have, I think, for the bottom half of the income distribution, schools are just holding pens.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm in education and I think about where it's headed, and I don't have a full-time job. I'm just an adjunct at CUNY, NYU, and other places. I ply my wares around the different schools in New York, but it doesn't feel like a tenure track position is necessarily waiting for me at the end of a PhD. It feels like that model is being changed completely.
It's like 2/3 of the faculty now is temp labor, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, I don't hold out a lot of hope for a 1947 style career in academia, and besides my own kind of career thing, there's like just the idea of the structure of schooling is just changing dramatically right in front of us, and charter schools and privatization seems to be the way it's going, but that seems like we'll end up with a population. I thought that we'll end up with a population that's educated by corporations and to their values, but we kind of already have that in some respects. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the hedge fund guys are really all over that stuff.
Yeah,
and a lot of people on the left take a cynical view of that. They think that these guys really are just into it for money making purposes. Mm-hmm. I think they really believe what they're doing. I think they really think that the state is a monopoly that needs to be broken. Mm-hmm. And you need competition in education. You need the private sector. You need to have a kind of financial market model of everything.
Yeah, right.
So Obamacare is a financial market model of healthcare, and charter schools, financial market model of education. Everything is just constantly up for grabs, repriced, total uncertainty.
Yeah. And
that's the world that Wall Street people live in and thrive on. For the general population, nobody really wants that. You don't want to live with constant uncertainty. Life is uncertain enough as it is without adding to it.
Right.
But that's what they want. They think it's good for the character to be disciplined like that.
There's some deep ideological undercurrents going on there. I wanted to go a little bit back to how your life evolved in this, because you kind of, I think, came of age in the late 60s. What did you say? Politically, you're starting to become aware of politics.
Yeah.
Somewhere in
I was born in 1952, and I was 15, 16 as the 60s were really flourishing.
What was that like for you? I mean, how were you relating to that stuff? I mean, I think about that. Everyone obviously talks about the major streams of thought during that time around the Vietnam War and around, rising counterculture. Where were you in all that milieu, if you were there at all?
Well, I was kind of lonely in a suburb in New Jersey. I would listen to WBAI and hear about all these exciting things that were going on elsewhere, all the stuff that was going on in New York. I remember they had live coverage by telephone, very primitive technology, but live coverage of the '68 Paris riots.
Yeah.
And I was just transfixed by that, but I was very remote from it. I was just in my parents' basement listening to this stuff on the radio. And then a few years later, I perversely took a rightward move. I was about to graduate from high school, and I became a conservative. I blame William F. Buckley and Milton Friedman.
William F. Buckley he was doing Firing Line at that point, is that right?
Yeah, and I read a few of his books. Became a devoted reader of his newspaper column. Up From Liberalism and was the book of his that did it for me, and Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, which is a masterful polemic.
My students at Baruch College bring it up to me all the time because I do a pretty anti-capitalist take on U.S. history, and they often come up to me and say, "Have you read Friedman? Have you read Milton Friedman?"
Yeah, one of my problems with Naomi Klein's shock doctrine is she doesn't take Friedman seriously enough. I mean, he's a very substantial figure, and he was a very effective debater.
Yeah.
Capitalism. I wish we had a book like Capitalism and Freedom. So then when I was about to...
When you say we, you mean the left?
Yeah. If there were a kind of left anti-capitalist book like that was
that
serious
compelling,
but polemical.
Yeah.
Very well argued. And
what was it about Buckley that attracted you during high school? Because the reason I ask is because I was a conservative in late high school too, but I fell under the spell. This was the 90s, so I fell under the spell of Rush Limbaugh, who is like this kind of crass analog of William F. Buckley.
We had a higher class of reactionary in my day.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And it's kind of William F. Buckley seems like a goddamn genius next to Rush Limbaugh. And Limbaugh, now when I look back on it, I realized that I liked Rush Limbaugh when I was in high school because I was in high school and I liked like stand-up comics. Basically, he comes off as a comic in a sense. Like
he's very good at doing radio.
Yeah,
he's got a great radio manner. He's got a good voice, and he's very effective.
So what was it about Buckley for you in high school?
I was came out of an upwardly mobile working class background. My father only did 2 years of college. My mother didn't go to college at all. They're both first generation U.S. born. So there was something about the waspy aristocracy that appealed to me, I have to admit. I wanted to be full of long words and hauteur like Buckley. And so I think that style really appealed to me.
There was a certain gravitas to the way he composed himself.
A lot of it was pompous nonsense, but...
And a lot of it was a Harvard accent.
Yale, please. And I was going off to Yale for college, and so Buckley was a distinguished alum, so yes. I was attracted by that. The thing, though, also that got me about the Friedman side was the appeal to freedom, which the left has largely lost. Corey Robin makes this argument very well. The left has lost any narrative of freedom.
Yeah,
and so much of the left now just seems to be about disapproval of people's behavior. And I was just talking to some friends the other day about that a lot of people who've never been on the right don't understand what fun it can be. And there's a lot of dark id that really comes out. You can just be so rude, and you think that you're violating convention and by being that rude. Yeah. And there's a weird pleasure to that people on the left are always worried about offending someone. And I think that's because we lost a lot of the class struggle hatred.
Yeah, I mean,
we can get back to that. It would be more emotionally satisfying.
Yeah, I mean there is a kind of Victorian streak in the history of progressivism in general. There is a kind of like, oh dear, let's not be too crass sexually. That's
certainly the upper middle class reformist side. The capital P progressive is very much like that.
And I mean, I tell people this that in the 90s where I was kind of raised among, or not raised among, but around people in high school who were, the kids of moneyed liberals. And so being a conservative was the punk rock thing to do at school. It was kind of like announced you as an outsider in some way. And I mean, I don't even know how much I embraced the right politics during that age beyond just to piss people off. It was fun to do that. It's like being a troll.
Yeah, well, that was part of what I was attracted to about being a right-winger in 1971. There were almost none. When I was in the Party of the Right at Yale, there were maybe a dozen people who were active members of it. I don't know what it's like now. Yeah, many of them were very weird.
Was there a Young Americans for Freedom chapter?
Yeah, there was a little YAF chapter, which overlapped heavily with the Party of the Right. There were a couple of splinter groups, too. There was a Tory party that were actually monarchists that had split away from the Party of the Right. And then the big split, the POR, insofar as a small group can have a big split, was between the traditionalists and the libertarians. The traditionalists were generally religious, some of them Catholic, some of them Episcopalian, and then the libertarians who were just very much like a contemporary libertarian.
Yeah,
let capitalism rip. Capitalism is groovy.
Sure,
but they're also into sex and drugs, which the traditionalists were not into. So there was that split. But for somehow Buckley was able to finesse that split, and this is the genius of Reagan too, the political genius of Reagan. He could finesse that split on the right, partly because he would talk the traditionalist line but not really do much about it.
Yeah, yeah.
So he could throw some red meat to the traditionalists without actually alienating anybody by making abortion illegal or something like that. But when Reagan shuffled off the scene, I thought that split would open up, and it never really did. The right has remained quite successful.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
But now, I mean, you just look at the contemporary right. When I was on the right 40 years ago, we were snotty. We were like, we're the intellectual elite, and always like the masses are stupid, and we look down our noses at them. And now the level of idiocy is just so appalling from almost the entire right that it's hard to imagine a serious person. I have a hard time thinking of a serious intellectual who is an American conservative now. That was then 40, 50 years ago. It was a very different story. It was a minority. It was a pretty extreme view, but there are a lot of serious people who wrote interesting books, but that's gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually watching, Noam Chomsky debate William F. Buckley about Vietnam is like an interesting debate. It doesn't, there are points on both sides, and I accept Chomsky's interpretation in general, but Buckley, it's not like watching Glenn Beck, debate someone. There's a grounding in reality that I just don't feel like I see in right-wing
now it's like
punditry.
A circus freak show.
Yeah. I mean, it's gotten that way on MSNBC, too, on the liberal version of it.
I can't bear to watch that thing.
Yeah.
It's just Democratic Party propaganda.
Yeah, well, 100%.
Yeah. It's actually, I think people have done studies and found it even more partisan than Fox, as I recall.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. And when you talk about, people, conservatives of the 70s kind of looking down upon the masses, I think of liberals that way now.
Yeah. Well, we had that instance the other day where one of the architects of Obamacare, Jonathan Gruber, said that they wrote the law to confuse the American voters because the American people are stupid. I think, and then there's a great firestorm around that, but I think he just uttered a true secret that he was not supposed to say in public. Yeah, that a lot of liberals really are contemptuous of people. And their interpretation of the last election, a lot of them have been saying, at least the ones I've heard, that the people are just stupid and bigoted, and that absolves them from any responsibility to looking at themselves. Like what's wrong with our message? Who are we appealing to? Maybe like this kind of Wall Street friendly, hawkish Democratic Party that has emerged over the last 20, 30 years is just not all that popular.
Well, if you don't like corporations and you think corporations and banks are and real estate companies and these elite kind of capitalist institutions are the problem in society, which seems like a rising opinion in America, neither party is really answering to that. And the Democrats seem like they are the natural ones to answer to that, but they can't because they're completely funded by all those people.
Yeah, and then have all this talk of Hillary being the inevitable nominee. I mean, she is that. She represents that. She is that. And
she's a lawyer for Walmart at some point in her career.
Well, she was on the board of Walmart. Yeah, she was in a partner in the Rose Law Firm, which represented all the big wigs in corporate Arkansas. The Stevens, which was then the largest investment bank west of the Mississippi, Walmart, Don Tyson, his chicken empire, which polluted the soil and rivers of Arkansas with abandon, and Governor Bill Clinton let him do it. That was Hillary's. That's what she emerged from. She started kind of as a liberal, like do-gooder who worked for the Children's Defense Fund, and then went over to become corporate lawyer, to the point where she actually represented business interests in Little Rock. There was a popular referendum to lower residential electricity rates and raise the rates on businesses. It passed. And the corporate Arkansas challenged this law, and Hillary was their lawyer, and she developed an argument which would later become very popular with the right in general, called takings. That is, that amounted to an unconstitutional seizure of property. And the right has since used those sorts of arguments to argue against any kind of regulation, environmental or safety or health or worker regulation. So here was Hillary as one of the founders of that. I wrote this piece for Harper's that's in the cover story in their November issue, which is now trickling off the stands.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
So I immersed myself in Hillary-ana for a couple of months.
What precipitated that? How did you find yourself writing about Hillary Clinton? Did you want to write about Hillary Clinton?
No, they approached me and they wanted a hit piece, and I wrote it for them. But I was really impressed. I didn't realize how deeply involved she was in Bill's political career, and how deeply they together were the founders of this new Democrat ideology. Yeah. So even when he was governor of Arkansas, he ran a school reform campaign that targeted teachers and teachers unions. That's more than about something like 25 years ago. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but so he was an architect of something that was later just a classic Republican approach to education, and has now become a totally bipartisan approach to education.
Yeah.
But they were the pioneers of it, and they were pioneers of the whole new Democrat ideology. Hillary was very much involved in working with Tony Blair to create this international third way, triangulation, neoliberal ideology. But she was very active in it. I used to think she was much more of a passive passenger on the Bill Clinton train.
Right.
She was very much part of it.
Yeah, no, it seems when I look at that picture, there's a picture of them like in college, looking like two stoned hippies, and I like Bill Clinton has like long hair and a beard, and she's got like kind of Coke bottle glasses, and I put it up on on the projector a lot. Like, look at these two people, like they took over the world in a lot of ways, like and it looks like they're going to continue to. What is it? Is it just about power with them? Because I when I think about the Clintons, I think about some moment I read where Bill Clinton is like, I want to win. I'm tired of the Democrats losing, and it feels like the strategy to move the party to the right is about winning elections.
Yeah, and Hillary initially was opposed to Bill Clinton's repealing of welfare, but when Dick Morris told me that when he showed her the polling data, she came around and ended up embracing welfare reform.
Yeah.
And she actually defended it in her memoir and said it was a great success. Then, of course, the last 10 years or so, we've seen millions of women and children fall into poverty because of it. But she loves to present herself as an advocate for women and children, nonetheless. So she still likes to make those liberal noises. But then when you actually look at there's nothing substantive behind it. It's a lot of photo ops. When she was Secretary of State, she would go travel around the world and gather together women in their colorful native costumes and say that she was uplifting women by doing these things. But it's just all purely symbolic.
Yeah.
She's not at all interested in doing anything real. I know there's this organization, David Brock, who was, of course, very anti-Clinton in the 90s, has become now a total publicist for the Clintons, has this Hillary front group called Correct the Record. And they tweeted the other day that Hillary had done great things in looking for employment programs for court reporters. Very nice for the court reporters, but really that's just... what is there to... I mean, all these minuscule initiatives.
Yeah, right.
They love to load up with this great symbolic import, but it's really just empty gestural stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the two examples you just gave of both Hillary and Bill's work in the 90s was kind of like undermining any of that progress, at a structural level, apart from a few court reporters getting, some benefit.
God knows what actually they got too.
Yeah.
You never know what they actually got. But she represents this really, really tired, political tradition, the Democratic Leadership Council, the New Democrat, that whenever you think of its appropriateness for the 90s, now it's just utterly obsolete. And I don't see, it just seems like, and sometimes I think, this whole country, this whole society is just suffering from exhaustion.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, nobody voted a couple weeks ago.
It's the lowest turnout in 72 years.
Yeah, I mean, don't you see the election, the last election as more of a loss for Democrats and a win for Republicans? Does that make sense?
I mean, well, they managed to turn out their base.
Yeah.
Their base is very enthusiastic, but that represents maybe, 20% of the population?
Right.
The old Obama coalition mostly stayed home, and with good reason. I mean, they voted for Obama in 2008, and to a lesser extent again in 12, with an expectation that the world might become a more peaceful and more egalitarian place, and it hasn't.
Yeah,
it's inequality's increased. Obama's become the drone president. The level of secrecy and spying in government. I didn't expect much from him.
I've heard liberals defending every single thing you're mentioning now. That's what's so disturbing.
I didn't expect much from him at first, but I did expect to be better on the civil liberties issues.
Yes,
former constitutional law professor. Good. I thought he was like a good process liberal who would not really carry on a lot of those Bush policies, but he in many cases he's doubled down on them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I like to say this annoys liberals when I say this, but in many cases he kills the people that Bush would have tortured. The drone attacks are all about that.
Can I just say that again? Obama kills the people that Bush would have tortured. Yeah.
That really annoys Democrats. So,
yeah, I love
use
that.
it with care.
Yeah, no, that sounds like something someone from the right would say. In terms of like that notion of kind of like rubbing it in the face, yes. And saying the things that are impolite.
Yeah, well, I like that.
How did you make your conversion? Because if when we left off talking about your past, you were a party of the right, Yale. How did you move forward or move somewhere else politically as the years went by? Because you certainly didn't move to the Democratic Party.
No. Well, the right wing interlude was really just a couple of years.
Yeah, me too.
I had
a fad.
I had this 8th grade history teacher who gave a lecture on Marx one day. I don't know where he got it from, but it was for 8th grade history teacher. It seemed like kind of a coach type guy.
Right.
But he must have plagiarized it or something. But it was pretty good. And I came home. I remember telling my parents I'd become a Marxist, and they were very upset to hear that. They were classic New Deal Democrats, Cold War anti-communist Democrats.
Yeah.
But I read Marx in my adolescent young mind, and then I had this brief departure on the right, which I'm glad I have now, because I really understand how people on the right think, that a lot of people on the left don't really understand. Mm-hmm. And they don't, like I was saying earlier, they don't understand the pleasures of being on the right.
And they think being on the right means you're automatically stupid or have nothing, no psychology even to it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I don't know. I think it was I was a freshman in college when I was really active in the Party of the Right, and by the time freshman year came to an end, I was just got caught up with a disreputable crowd, and sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Right.
But also I just I think I just returned to my roots, both my political roots. It was hideous. And then Watergate happened, and I was just like, the right looked so terrible at that point.
It's interesting, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, because an intersection with politics. Because we're just talking about kind of this Victorian impulse among liberals, and there was certainly like a split on the left in the late '60s between the SDS radicals that kind of wanted to keep it clean and move forward that way, and then the people that were like counterculture, commune people taken in the direction of culture. It seems like that's a pretty core split on the left. Is that kind of lifestyle versus serious politics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, when you see a lot around sexual stuff now too.
Yeah,
There's a Victorian streak to a lot of people on the left. Yeah, I'm still very much of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll party. And I think that stuff is really important. And if you're going to be a Marxist about it, it's very material stuff.
Isn't the normcore movement isn't that kind of away from sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and that kind of like individual? I'm thinking of Connor now, because he's like, his thing is, and I don't know if it's tongue in cheek, but his idea that like we must rid ourselves of bourgeois individualism and all wear mom jeans and that kind of stuff, so that we
that word was on the short list of the Oxford Dictionary's words of the year.
Normcore. Right?
Yes, vape won, but normcore was a runner-up.
What do you think of all that stuff? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll seems divorced from politics now, in a sense. It seems like the country went to a place that we're going to legalize pot, and you can be a right-wing racist, pot smoking, long hair.
Yeah, you certainly can. When I was in graduate school in Virginia, I went to the University of Virginia in the late 70s, and I spent some time living in the rural areas outside Charlottesville. And I was shocked to discover there's such a thing as a redneck hippie.
Yeah. They're all over the place.
Yeah, now it was to a Yankee who'd never spent any time in the rural South. It was a shock.
Yeah.
There's the political content of some of that sex, drugs, and rock and roll stuff is gone or even questionable. But on the other hand, I still think these are important values that one should embrace and promote.
Yeah, I agree.
Who needs bourgeois discipline?
No, I agree. At the same time, it's like, I don't know, it feels like I don't know. I think certain people would make the argument that a prerequisite to political organization is the kind of like getting rid of the ego and seeing the body as a collective and those kinds of values.
Well, I think collective values are a good thing, but Susie Bright said to me once, "Workers, the world unite" is an erotic sentiment. So there is something, or any kind of revolutionary vision of a better society. It's not one that's dominated as ours is by competitive individualism, atomized personalities. I mean, there has to be an erotic component to reimagining a better society. And just one of the things that depresses me about the Hillary thing is that it just seems like the society has lost any sense of adventure or imagination. Here we are, just like in this compulsion to repeat with Bill, Hillary, now a Clinton-Bush election. Are you really thinking about that?
Yeah, I know. It's sickening to think about.
And it's just like there's this any capacity, and I can understand being skeptical of utopianism, for all the reasons, whether, well, the right was always skeptical of utopianism because they thought it would always end to the gulag. But then you have a lot of people on the left who are like anti-utopian because it was actually kind of a similar critique in some sense. It was all about the old master narratives and all that sort of thing. We're supposed to be rejecting of master narratives, but I don't know. I think we need a dose of utopianism, and we need discipline and thought and rigor and all those things too, and organization and agendas. I mean, those are all very important, but there has to be some kind of almost erotic imagination that gives it life.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about Occupy coming out in 2011, I think a lot of us were hopeful that it meant something, and we're still figuring out what it meant. But there was a lot of kind of anti-state rhetoric around Occupy. I'm thinking of like the twinkle fingers and like kind of like endless, like leaderlessness and things like that. I mean, what do you think about that impulse on the left of kind of like getting away from any kind of institutional structure?
I think it's just a prescription for decay and failure.
It reminds me of the '60s commune movement in a sense.
Yeah, some of those actually managed to stay together.
Yeah, the farm I think is still.
Yeah,
there.
They still do they still have their maternity clinics down there. And then Twin Oaks, I think, managed to stay alive.
The Rainbow Gatherings still exist.
Yeah, I kind of followed them for a while. All these intentional communities, I thought they were really interesting. I could never do it, but I admire their dedication. I really like all the bourgeois comforts. I have to admit, and I would not want to live in a muddy commune or anything. But I do admire that impulse.
The idea makes sense to me. It always seemed appealing. Kind of like I don't know. Now it gets ridiculed a lot on the left now. But the idea of like building a society as a model of what you think it should be and living the way you want.
I don't know if that's some kind of that much political effect, but it's a good thing. I mean, if you're really that dedicated to it, it's a good way to spend your life. If you're really that passionate about it. It's really hard to do. I mean, I used to read these accounts of I think the Twin Oaks made a lot of its money by selling hammocks to Pier 1, and then Pier 1 cut its order by half, so Twin Oaks was thrown into crisis. They got into book indexing of all things, which is something I used to do way back when. But it's a tough life. But I really do admire people like putting their lives on the line like that. But if you really want to change the society in any significant way, I don't see how you can do it without some kind of institutions, something like parties, and then operating through something, not something like, there is nothing else like the state, but operating through a state. I don't see how you can really change things significantly without addressing those, without taking those institutional roots. Now, I think electoral politics is really mostly hopeless. But that doesn't mean I think you need to organize people about. I think the most promising thing to me would be to organize people around very specific issues, and press the state into changing policies. Not necessarily like by running candidates, but just by becoming a large and obnoxious enough force that the state has to listen.
No, it seems like that. I mean, it seems like. You could make a generalization about that being successful during the New Deal. It's kind of that there were radical interest groups that were around and had a voice and were pressuring the FDR administration to, move towards more conciliatory gestures. And it seems like that they didn't win, but the fact that they were there pressuring the administration made the New Deal happen at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Richard Hofstadter said somewhere that the period from roughly the 30s to the 60s were the only period in American history where that competitive individualism was not the dominant mode of thinking.
Yeah.
That there was actually some sort of sense of collectivity in the broad population. And it's really hard to figure out how we can ever get that back, but because this competitive individualism is so deeply ingrained in American culture, and it's only been reinforced by neoliberalism. And we have now a generation of people who know nothing other than neoliberalism.
Well, in a lot of ways, it seems like the population has been atomized by the internet in a lot of different ways, both like culturally and socially. People are kind of in their own scene. And when I think of like the 50s and 60s, I think of the state being more in control of the story. I think of anti-communism and like the duck and cover and all that kind of like the project. It seemed like everyone was involved. Americans were being asked to be involved, and the Vietnam War is kind of the moment where the state kind of doesn't ask. The only thing the state asks is the draft, I guess. But the state is not explaining Vietnam in a way that they want Americans to, build victory gardens to beat the communists in Vietnam. It just doesn't happen that way. And it feels like, I don't know. When I hear you say that, that's what I think of. I think of that we're not involved in that kind of like, I don't know, civic responsibility way that we think about. We're more a collection of individuals now.
Yeah, and
selfie is the word that they entered into the Oxford Dictionary last year, right?
Yes. I think you look at what the way liberals and even some people on the left reacted to Obama's election was to give him a pass. It's like, okay, let's refrain from criticizing, and our guy is in office now. Let's just give him a pass. So like the anti-war movement collapsed. The unions did nothing to pressure him. He came into office with something like a mandate, a 60% plus approval rating, control of both houses of Congress, and an opportunity to break with neoliberalism in some sense. And of course, he's not the kind of guy who's going to do that. But there was no pressure on him to do so. And it's everyone. I remember like Barbara Ehrenreich and some people organized this Leftist for Obama thing in 2008. And I was on the radio with her, and she said something about how they're going to hold his feet to the fire. And I thought, well, first of all, who are we? How many hands do you have to hold those feet to the fire? But the other thing is, you're just not going to withdraw support. There's no credible way that he is going to feel threatened.
Right.
And this is the problem of the Working Families Party, by the way, that they had all along. Like they never had a credible threat of exit. They would never not endorse a Democrat, and that's why the Cuomo debacle was so remarkable. That they endorsed that jerk who was precisely the sort of Democrat they should be organizing against.
Yeah. And
they endorsed him out of these realpolitik reasons, and also I think union corruption, and. It's just like I think it's destroyed that party's credibility completely.
Yeah.
But it's if you're going to do this inside-outside strategy, you have to have some credible way of remaining outside, and they don't. And all these progressives for Obama never really had it either.
And it's amazing how politics works. So you think about, like we were talking about before we started recording, about how the Clintons and the Cuomos don't really get along personally, but politically their partnership works. The Hillary and Barack Obama's primary fight in 2008 was nasty. I mean, it was really vicious, and in a way, like it almost helped. It helped kind of create that mystique around Obama that he was the real challenger that had that was like this anti-war principle.
Who was prodded by Harry Reid. It's not like he came out of nowhere.
Yeah. and I mean, do you have any notion, because you studied the Clintons over the last months? Do you have any notion of how the Clintons and the Obamas relate to each other on a personal level? Are they? Is Obama going to be hardcore campaigning for Hillary in 2016?
Well, I think there are tensions between them, but they also need each other.
Yeah. Because she said nasty shit during that primary.
Yeah. There were some. There's some really
something like I can appeal to the white working class and like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And they're saying that's how their path to victory is. They're talking about now is getting back those white working class votes that Obama lost. So then they're talking about, they have this electoral map that involves winning some swing states, in the upper South. I think they're dreaming about that, but that's what they think. But she had, I can't imagine she'd want him to campaign for her. He's got a 40% approval rating now.
Yeah.
Like nobody wanted him to campaign for them during the last election. When I interviewed Dick Morris to do this, who was the Clinton's guru for 20 years. They had a very rocky relationship on and off. Now it's way off.
He had a sex scandal at some point.
He got busted sucking the toes of a prostitute.
That's
yes.
right. I didn't want to say it. But
it's rich. But he's a very interesting character. I mean, he's just like a charlatan and a liar, but also really, really sharp in a lot of times. So it was very interesting to interview him. So I said, okay, how is Hillary going to deal with Obama's record? You know, she can't run away from him because they're the same party. She
Right.
served his administration.
Right.
So she can't completely reject him, but then she can't embrace him either. So he said that she's going to say that Obama outlined a beautiful vision, but I'm the one who's going to make it happen.
Oh, boy.
And then he said she's going to find some things to disagree with him on. This is like late July. He said she, for example, will say he didn't arm the Syrian rebels early enough. 2 weeks later, she gave that interview to Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic and said he didn't arm the Syrian rebels early enough. So like, Morris knows how she thinks.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing she's going to do. She's going to triangulate Obama, I guess. Basically.
I mean, I read something about how we can expect a lot of talk about like climate change, and she's going to cast herself as the climate change president. I see that as less likely.
That seems really implausible. Politico just today had a piece on Obama embracing climate change in his final 2 years in office. This is his chance to have a legacy, and because the president can do a lot by executive order, he's going to take that route. I hope it's true. I wish he'd spent this last 6 years agitating on climate change, but better late than never, I guess.
When you think of these people, I mean, do you see any difference between Democrats and Republicans? I know that's kind of a very common meme among in American politics, or ideas like that these are all just gangsters essentially. Who are these people? Like, why do we have such an ugly set of political people at the top of our system?
Well, as Christopher Hitchens said before he went bad, they're two cheeks of the same derriere.
Yeah.
But they're not the same. They're not identical. I think you can look at different. They certainly have different bases. Republicans obviously have this very white, older, very religious base, religious right base. Democrats, obviously have. Not the white working class, but the non-white working class. Single women. We all play these demographic games. It's amazing.
Right.
Politics has become demographics.
Yeah.
And then they also have different corporate constituencies. The Republicans are the party of extractive industries, dirty industries, really low wage employers. So like Walmart and Halliburton, really iconic Republican companies.
Ugh.
Democrats, have Hollywood and some tech.
Yeah.
And a good chunk of Wall Street. Wall Street has more Democrats than most business sectors do.
Well, you mentioned tech. Tech obviously is kind of the story right now. And I think Uber to this morning is in the news because the CEO of Uber said that he thought that it might be a good idea for them to start trashing journalists
digging
personally.
Up personal information about journalists.
Which is beautiful. There's something going on with a kind of tech libertarianism or something like that in San Francisco right now. It seems like that's the story of the new capitalists that are not, I don't know, necessarily Democrats, right?
Some of them are. I mean, I think people like Apple,
Zuckerberg,
some of Google, some of Facebook. Yeah. But then you have these crazy libertarians.
Yeah.
The founder of Uber used to use the cover of the Fountainhead as his Twitter avatar.
Is that right?
Yeah. And then you have, of course, Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist who wants to create these libertarian islands just out of the reach of the law.
Yeah, they use the word freedom a lot, right? Like that's their thing. It's like freedom. But it seems disingenuous to me because it seems like...
Well, they mean freedom for people like them.
Right.
They don't want to be hobbled by the masses.
Yeah.
Milton Friedman's grandson, what's his name? Paco Friedman, I think, had this great piece in a, not great in the sense of inspiring, but great in the sense of revealing, piece in a Cato publication, in which he says very explicitly that libertarianism is incompatible with democracy, that most people are not libertarians. Most people want a government that delivers them services. And most people, if you really worked at it, would be amenable to a program that would tax the rich to pay for programs for everyone else. And obviously, a true libertarian would find that thoroughly appalling.
Yeah.
And so they're anti-democratic. And most libertarians will not talk that way openly, but I think that's a lot of this tech libertarianism is like, leave us alone to do our thing. And now, of course, they love that word disruption. That's the buzzword of the last
Wait, how
few
are they
years.
using the word disruption?
They're disrupting. Uber is disrupting the taxi industry.
Ah.
And Airbnb is disrupting.
Oh, they're casting themselves as like almost like populist outsiders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And they're breaking up the taxi monopoly. Now, now in New York City, the guys who own medallions are a bunch of parasites who, rent the cabs. The drivers have to work 8 hours just to pay the rent. So it's grotesque. The drivers are horribly exploited. But like disrupting the taxi monopoly means cutting cab drivers' wages even more than they are now. And that's what they're disrupting is always happening at the expense of someone else.
Yeah.
And or they're doing it for the consumer. But if you create this generalized competition where you're just constantly cutting wages all the time. It's not going to benefit anybody but a handful of people over the long run. So look at Uber. Like they're a relative handful of people who are going to get Uber stock. It's not public yet, but it will be someday. And they'll be billionaires. And then you have this hundreds of thousands of drivers now working for Uber who are not employees. They're independent contractors who see their pay getting constantly cut. And that seems to be what they mean. That's the libertarian vision of how to
but and also that they can be fired for not having enough thumbs up or stars from social media.
The riders rate the drivers.
Yeah, right.
And I think if you get below a 4.7 average, you're as they don't say fired because you're not an employee. You're deactivated.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of that vision scares the shit out of me. That vision of employment, that service employees could be subjected to the whim of social media for their paycheck.
Yeah, well, I'm actually working a piece for The Nation about the sharing economy, and so I've been looking into Uber and Airbnb and all this stuff.
And the reason that sucks is because most people in America hate service workers. Like if you go to, people complain about cashiers and waiters. People complain about the people behind the counter all the time
with crappy jobs, barely making minimum wage.
Why didn't the girl at Duane Reade smile at me when I bought a pack of gum from her?
Yeah.
And it's like, that girl is working a shit job.
I interviewed an Uber driver in Chicago who told me that the passengers really lorded over them.
Yeah.
So like, run that red light or there goes your 5-star rating.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. There's no that's not protection for employees. That's about as far from a union contract as I could possibly imagine.
Well, yeah, they want everyone to be unprotected all the time.
Yeah.
Because we all need to be in constant competition with each other.
So, for me, it's like, and we'll wrap this up here. Thank you, sir, for talking to me. But, it's been a long, in your lifetime, we've seen nothing but decline, it seems, for the working class, in terms of benefits, in terms of wages. We talked about that one little bump in the 90s being the only bump. Isn't that kind of is that like a bad wager on the part of elites to just kind of create a massive underclass in this country? Because it seems like that's what's happening.
Well, you think that it can't work out well in the long run.
Yeah.
But from their point of view, it's been working out really well so far.
Right.
And, that old joke about the guy who jumps out of a 40-story building, passes the 20th floor and says, things are going okay so far.
Yeah, right.
Maybe it's like that. I don't know.
Or Wile E. Coyote running out off the cliff and not realizing he's out there yet.
Who knows where it ends?
Yeah.
At some point, you'd think that there'd be some kind of rebellion or some kind of... Well, you could look at the 2008 crisis as some kind of rupture of the contradictions of that model. Suddenly, we'd had 30 years of attacks on working class living standards to raise the profit rate, but people then compensated for their declining incomes by borrowing money.
Yeah.
And then they stopped being able to borrow money after the 2008 financial crisis. Now we see this very poor recovery that we've had for the last few years, which is partly because that people just don't have the money, and without that jolt of borrowed money, we can't really generate an energetic recovery by orthodox measures. I'm not talking about like humane, squishy measures.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I mean, there is that sense that that contradiction is blown up and nobody's fixed it. But until there's some sort of real political trouble, I think they're just prospering, and the 1% or the 0.1% or the 0.01% is doing just fine, and they really feel no reason to change anything. And as long as their sleep is untroubled, they're not going to on their own.
Yeah. I think about that underclass having iPhones now, and like even the poorest person in America having, I don't know, some access to.
They have Android. The poor have Androids.
The poor have the Androids, right? Because I'm teaching this class on Great Depression now, and it's just like, I don't know, the difference between rock bottom during the 30s and rock bottom lifestyle-wise for now is very different.
Yeah, I mean, my father was, from an immigrant family in the Depression. They just got evicted constantly on the run, had no heat.
Yeah.
And living in Jersey City. I mean, that's certainly people live like that now, but nowhere near as many as did in 1935.
Right, and nowhere near as many to make it a dangerous situation.
Right,
and like we began though, it doesn't necessarily mean it's left. If just because there's a lot of people suffering, that can go into a fascist situation too.
Yeah, I mean, fascism arises in part in response to a left-wing threat, and we don't really have one of those right now, so who needs fascism?
Yeah, we need some fascism to inject some life into this political system. Doug Henwood, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.